Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into something pretty big today, something that could really impact people's lives in Texas.
hmm
And that is the new law about expunging criminal records.
Big changes.
Yeah, so starting January 1st, 2025, Texas is making it easier for certain offenses to be completely wiped clean.
Yeah,
Like they never happened.
that's a big deal.
It is a really big deal. And to
Yeah.
help us unpack all of this, we've got excerpts from the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure,
Okay.
specifically Chapter 55A, which
Mm.
is all about this expunction process.
Yeah.
So if you live in Texas, or honestly, even if you just find criminal justice reform interesting,
Right.
then you are in the right place for this deep dive.
Absolutely. So what's really interesting here is that Texas is taking a big step
Mhm.
toward giving people a second chance.
Yeah,
They're acknowledging that, look, a past mistake shouldn't follow you forever. It
right.
shouldn't affect every single aspect of your life from here on out.
Okay, so let's break down this law because it can get a little complicated.
Sure.
It breaks expunction down into different categories.
Right.
So first up, we have what's called mandatory expunction.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the courts don't have a choice.
Right.
If you meet the criteria, your record is automatically cleared. It's like a legal get-out-of-jail-free card.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Right.
Yeah, for example, let's say you go to trial and you are found not guilty.
Okay.
Your arrest records are automatically expunged. It's as if the arrest never even happened.
Well, yeah, that makes sense because you were declared innocent.
Right.
So why should the arrest hang over your head?
Exactly. And I mean, really think about that for a second.
Yeah,
That arrest could impact your ability to get a job,
right.
to rent an apartment, even to get a loan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just like the stigma that goes along with having any sort of arrest on your record,
Absolutely.
regardless of the outcome. So
Oh,
it's a really big deal to have that just cleared completely.
Now, there is one exception to this automatic expunction. Let's say you and a couple of your friends decide to rob a bank,
Okay.
all right, but you back out at the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
Your friends, they go through with it and they get caught.
Okay.
Even if you're acquitted on the robbery charge because you weren't actually there,
Right.
if your friends tell the police, hey, he helped us plan the whole thing,
Oh.
that separate conviction for conspiracy or something
Oh, wow.
could prevent you from getting that arrest expunged.
Oh, wow. Okay, so even if you weren't physically present for the crime,
Yeah,
just being involved in the planning stages can still come back to bite you.
absolutely. So it's not a free pass for just thinking about doing something bad.
Right, right.
You have to actually stay away from any criminal activity.
Got it.
Now, another situation where expunction is mandatory is if you receive a pardon for actual innocence.
Okay.
So this means you were convicted of a crime,
Mm-hmm.
but later evidence proved that you didn't actually do it.
Oh, wow.
In that case, your record is wiped clean, acknowledging that a mistake was made.
So it's kind of like the justice system saying, oops, our bad, here's your clean slate back.
Exactly. They're admitting they got it wrong, and they're trying to make it right.
That's great.
And here's something even more interesting. You still qualify for expunction, even if you're pardoned for reasons other than innocence.
Really?
So even if you were convicted and weren't declared actually innocent, a pardon can still be your ticket to a clean record.
So even if there is some guilt involved, a pardon can be a powerful tool for getting that fresh start.
It is, and it really highlights the power of executive clemency and the idea of second chances.
Okay, so we've talked about being found not guilty and getting a pardon.
Yeah.
But there's one more specific situation in this mandatory expunction category, right?
Right.
It had something to do with unlawful carrying of a handgun.
Yes. This applies to people who were convicted before September 1st, 2021, under a previous law about carrying a handgun without a license.
Okay.
It was stricter back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so this new law is basically offering a path to expunction for those who were convicted under that old law.
Wow, so Texas is really giving people a chance to clear their records, even for some past convictions, which is pretty amazing.
It is a big step, and it'll be interesting to see how many people are actually able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, but there's one situation here that really caught my eye.
Yeah.
It's the part about mistaken identity.
Oh, yeah.
What happens if someone's information gets put into this system, even though they were never actually arrested?
That's a great question. And it happens more often than you might think.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Imagine someone with the same name as you gets arrested,
Okay.
but the police accidentally put your birthday or your address into the system.
Oh, gosh.
It's a total nightmare scenario, but thankfully the law provides a remedy.
Oh, good.
You can petition to have that mistake corrected and have your name completely cleared.
So even if you weren't physically arrested,
Right.
you can still petition to have your information removed from those records.
Absolutely. It's all about making sure the records are accurate and that innocent people aren't wrongly penalized.
That's really important.
It is, and it speaks to the larger issue of data privacy and how important it is to protect our personal information.
For sure. Okay, so that covers mandatory expunction. But now let's move on to something called
Right.
special circumstances requiring expunction.
Okay.
And this basically covers situations where charges didn't lead to a conviction
Right.
and they're no longer pending.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you're arrested, but the grand jury decides not to indict you,
Right.
does that automatically qualify you for expunction?
Well, it depends on the severity of the offense and how much time has passed.
Okay.
For less serious offenses, it could be as little as 6 months. For more serious offenses, it could be up to 3 years.
Okay.
But here's the interesting part. The state attorney can actually speed things up
Oh, really?
by certifying that those records are no longer needed for any investigation or prosecution.
So they can essentially say, hey, we know we messed up. Let's get this cleared up as quickly as possible.
Exactly. And that can be a huge relief for the person involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are some other reasons why a case might be dismissed that would then lead to expunction?
Well, if someone successfully completes a veterans treatment court program
Okay.
or a mental health court program, the charges are dismissed and they become eligible for expunction.
Okay.
It's a great incentive to participate in those programs and work towards a fresh start.
Yeah, it's like a reward for taking positive steps to address those underlying issues.
All right.
That's really encouraging.
It is, and it shows a commitment to rehabilitation rather than just punishment.
I like that.
Another interesting reason for dismissal and subsequent expunction is if the court finds that the arrest was based on a mistake or false information or just a lack of probable cause.
So basically, if the police messed up and arrested you for no good reason,
Exactly. You can get those records cleared.
that's reassuring to know.
It is, and it's a safeguard against police misconduct and overreach.
Okay, and then finally there's this statute of limitations, which basically means if it's too late to prosecute someone for an offense because too much time has passed, they're eligible for expunction.
That's right. It's like a time limit on how long the state can hold something over your head.
Yeah, I like that.
And that brings us to the end of these first two categories.
Okay, so this is all great news for people in Texas who are looking for a second chance.
It is.
But I'm guessing it's not always this clear-cut right.
You're right. There are situations where expunction isn't so black and white,
Oh, boy.
where the courts have more discretion in deciding whether to grant it.
Okay, so now we're moving into a bit of a gray area.
A little bit, yeah.
This is where it gets even more interesting. So stay tuned for part 2,
Yeah.
where we'll explore this whole world of discretionary expunction and all of its complexities.
I'll see you there.
See you there.
All right. So as we get deeper into this expunction law in Texas, things are going to get a little more complicated,
Okay.
a little more nuanced. We're moving into discretionary expunction now,
Ooh, discretionary.
where the court has a little bit more flexibility. Okay.
In deciding whether to grant that clean slate?
So instead of like a clear-cut yes or no,
Right.
it's more like a judgment call
Yeah, exactly.
based on the specifics of the case.
It's less about meeting specific criteria and more about the court weighing all those different factors that are involved.
I bet that's pretty nerve-wracking
Oh, yeah.
for someone who's hoping to clear their record.
Absolutely.
Not knowing for sure if they're going to get that fresh start.
It introduces a level of uncertainty
Right,
because the outcome is less predictable.
right.
One of the scenarios where this comes into play is when someone is acquitted by an appellate court.
Okay, hold on. For those of us who aren't legal experts,
Sure.
remind me what an appellate court is.
Yeah. So basically, an appellate court is a higher court that reviews decisions of lower courts, like trial courts.
Mm-hmm.
So someone goes to trial, they're found guilty, but they appeal the verdict.
Right.
And if they win their appeal,
Mm-hmm.
if a higher court says, nope, you were actually innocent.
That's when this part of the law comes in.
So even though they were ultimately found not guilty,
Right.
expunction isn't automatically guaranteed.
You got it.
That seems a little counterintuitive.
It is a little bit, but the court still gets to decide
Okay.
whether expunction is warranted in that specific case.
Gotcha.
And interestingly, the likelihood of getting expunction in this situation
Yeah.
is actually higher for offenses that only carry a fine as a penalty.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So if the crime wasn't serious enough to warrant jail time,
Right.
the courts are more likely to grant the expunction.
That's the general idea.
Okay.
The thinking seems to be that if it wasn't like a major offense,
Yeah.
it's less likely to be a factor in, like, future opportunities.
Right. It's like the system saying, okay, you made a mistake, but it wasn't a huge one, so we'll give you a chance to move on.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. What other kind of interesting situations fall under this discretionary category?
Well, there's one that I find particularly interesting.
Yeah.
It allows a prosecutor to recommend expunction.
Even before a trial takes place.
Really? So before someone has even been found guilty or innocent,
That's right.
the prosecutor can just say, hey, let's clear this person's record.
They can.
That's wild.
It is pretty surprising, isn't it?
Yeah.
It definitely raises some questions about like the power dynamics at play and how these decisions get made.
Yeah, like what factors would even lead a prosecutor
Right.
to make that kind of recommendation?
Yeah, exactly.
And what does it mean for the defendant's case?
Those are really good questions.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's a lot of potential for both fairness and maybe even some potential for bias,
Right.
dependent on the prosecutor's motivations.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Definitely a topic worth exploring further.
For sure. Okay. But for now, let's move on to another important aspect of this law.
All right.
And that is the cases where expunction is specifically prohibited.
Oh, okay.
So even with this new law making it easier to clear records, there are still some offenses that are going to stay on your record no matter what. Right.
Which I guess makes sense.
There are certain situations where the law just draws a hard line. For example, remember how we talked about you can't get an expunction if you're convicted of another offense? That was part of the same criminal episode.
Right.
Even if you're acquitted on the initial charge.
Right. That whole, like, you can't escape the consequences of bad decisions made with your buddies.
Exactly.
Okay. What other offenses are, like, ineligible for expunction?
Well, one that might surprise people is that driver's license suspensions or revocations can't be expunged under this law.
So if you get a DUI, for example, clearing your criminal record won't automatically get your driver's license back.
That's right. Those are separate matters.
Okay.
Handled through a whole different set of rules and procedures.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's good to know it highlights the complexity of the legal system.
It does.
And how different offenses are treated differently.
Absolutely.
What other types of offenses are in this no expunction category?
Another important one is that records related to arrests for violating community supervision.
Okay.
Which is basically probation can't be expunged.
So if you're on probation and you mess up, that violation is going to stay on your record?
It is.
Even if the original offense might have been eligible for expunction?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's about upholding the terms of that probation.
Gotcha.
And lastly.
And finally, there's a provision that addresses people who decide to skip town after they're arrested.
Oh, yeah.
If you run from the law, you basically forfeit your right to expunction in certain circumstances.
So the message is clear face, your problems head on, don't run from them.
Exactly.
If you want a chance at that clean slate.
It's about taking responsibility for your actions.
Okay, so we've talked about who's eligible, who's not.
Right.
The different scenarios where the courts have more leeway in making their decisions. But I'm curious about the process.
Yeah.
Like, how does someone actually go about getting their records expunged?
What are the steps involved?
Okay, well, that's where things get a little more technical, but we can definitely break it down.
Okay.
So first of all, who can file for you?
Okay.
In most cases, it's the person seeking expunction. But there are some interesting exceptions.
Okay, like what? Can my mom file for me if she's really worried about it?
Not quite.
Okay.
But there are situations where the Department of Public Safety can actually file a petition on someone's behalf.
Oh, wow.
If they meet certain requirements, and maybe even more interesting, a close relative of a deceased person can file for expunction on their behalf.
Wow. So even after someone is gone, having a criminal record can still have a lasting impact.
It can.
Wow, that's really compassionate.
It is.
Okay, what about the live-in?
Right.
What do they need to do to get the ball rolling?
So there's a specific form.
Okay.
It needs to be filled out. Requires all the basic identifying information, details about the offense and the arrest, and this is really important. A list of all the agencies' courts, even private entities.
Wow.
That might have those records.
Yeah, you got to tell them exactly where to go.
You do.
To wipe the slate clean.
It's all about accuracy and completeness.
Makes sense. Are there any other procedural details that stand out?
Yes, there's a specific requirement for applications that are based on mistaken identity.
Okay.
Where your information was in the system even though you were never arrested.
Right.
In those cases, you actually have to include your fingerprints.
Fingerprints with your application.
With your application.
Yeah.
Wow. I guess that's to make absolutely sure that they are removing the correct person's information.
Exactly.
And preventing any further mix-ups.
It's about accuracy.
Smart.
And accountability.
Okay, so once the application is filed, then what?
So the court will schedule a hearing.
Okay.
Everyone involved gets notified. And if the court finds that, yeah, this person's entitled to expunction, they issue an order, making it all legal and binding. Okay, so that's the process in a nutshell. But I have one more question.
Okay.
What actually happens to the records?
Okay.
Do they just like toss them in a shredder?
It's a bit more complicated than that.
Okay.
In most cases, the records are either returned to the court, or if that's not feasible, they remove or destroy any identifying information.
Okay.
But importantly, all those references to those records are deleted from any public databases.
So it's not just about hiding the records.
Right.
It's about making them truly inaccessible.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that those records can't be used against someone in the future.
In the future. Okay.
But there is an interesting difference in how they handle records in cases of mistaken identity.
Oh, okay. How so?
So instead of return the records or deleting the index references, they just remove the portions that identify the person who is wrongly included. And if they have information about the actual person who was arrested, they can correct the record.
Oh, that's good.
With that information.
So in those cases, it's about correcting the record rather than just erasing it altogether.
Exactly.
Which makes sense, especially if it helps ensure that the right person is held accountable.
It does.
But okay, can someone who got their record expunged ever see those records again?
Yes, they can in most cases.
But they can't.
The court can give those expunged records back to the individual.
Oh, wow.
Except in cases of acquittal. Or mistaken identity.
That's interesting. I wonder why those exceptions exist.
It's a great question, and it probably has to do with the specific legal and procedural considerations surrounding those types of cases.
Definitely something to ponder.
Absolutely.
Okay, but let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what really matters.
Okay.
The effects of an expunction order. What does it actually do for the person whose record is cleared?
Right.
That's the ultimate goal, right? To give people a real second chance.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to explore in part 3.
Okay.
Where we delve into the real-world implications of having your record expunged.
Sounds good. I will see you there. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Texas expunction law. We've covered who's eligible, how the process works, but now let's get to what really matters. What does an expunction order actually do for someone?
This is where it gets really exciting.
Okay.
This is where all those legal details translate into real tangible change in people's lives.
Right.
The law is really clear. Once an expunction order is final, those records are basically off limits. Releasing them, keeping them, sharing them, using them, it's all prohibited.
So it's like hitting the delete button, but with the full force of the law behind it?
That's a great way to put it. And what's even more powerful is that the person whose record was expunged can legally deny that the arrest ever happened.
Whoa.
It's like it vanished into thin air.
Okay.
As far as the law is concerned.
So for job applications, background checks, anything like that, they can honestly say, nope, never been arrested.
Exactly. That's huge. It gives people a real chance to move forward without the shadow of their past hanging over them.
Yeah.
There is one exception, though.
Okay.
If they are questioned under oath in a criminal proceeding about that specific arrest, they can only say that the matter has been expunged.
Right.
They can't lie under oath.
Right. You can't have people erasing their past to get away with new crimes.
Exactly.
Gotcha. But in most everyday situations, it's like getting a true fresh start.
Absolutely.
And Texas is serious.
Oh, yeah.
About making sure those expunction orders are respected. Violating one is a big deal.
It is.
What kind of consequences are we talking about?
All right. So let's say a police officer or a government employee learns about an expunged arrest and then tries to use those records against someone. Or someone intentionally holds on to expunged records instead of destroying them like they're supposed to.
They're in big trouble. We're talking a Class B misdemeanor, which can mean up to 6 months in jail and a fine of $2,000.
Whoa. Okay, so they do not mess around.
They don't.
Texas is committed to making this expunction process work, not just on paper, but in real life.
It's a powerful statement about the importance of second chances and recognizing that people can change and grow.
Yeah, it really is. This has been a really incredible deep dive.
It has.
I feel like we went from these like nitty-gritty details of the law to like the broader implications for individuals and society as a whole.
Absolutely.
So what's the key takeaway here for our listeners?
The bottom line is that Texas is making a significant shift towards a more forgiven and rehabilitative criminal justice system by expanding access to expunction and strengthening the protections for those expunged records.
Yeah.
They're creating real pathways for people to rebuild their lives.
That's definitely something to celebrate. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a few things to think about.
This new law has the potential to be truly transformative, but it also raises some important questions.
Absolutely.
What do you think?
I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this law impacts things like employment opportunities, housing access, and even just the way society views people who have had past run-ins with the law. Could this be a step towards a more just and equitable system for everyone?
That's a great question. And it's one that we're all going to be grappling with.
Yeah.
As this law goes into effect in 2025, for anyone listening who's in Texas and thinks that they might be eligible, I encourage you to explore your options and seek legal advice if needed.
Absolutely.
Knowledge is power, and the more you understand about your rights, the better you can advocate for yourself.
And remember, even if you're not in Texas, this is a movement that's happening all over the country.
That's true.
States are recognizing the need for second chances and giving people the opportunity to move forward with their lives. It's a trend worth watching and supporting.
That's it for this deep dive, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of Texas expunction law. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic. Until then, stay curious.